Vice President Kamala Harris took the stage last night at the Democratic National Convention and accepted her party's nomination for president. Take a listen.
On behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another, on behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
Her campaign says Harris will focus on three objectives: sharing her story and her record, contrasting her agenda with former President Trump's, and rooting her vision in a sense of patriotism. On Wednesday night, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate, took the stage.
It's the honor of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States. It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team. Kamala Harris is tough. Kamala Harris is experienced, and Kamala Harris is ready.
Well, that's talk from a high school football coach, right? And Walz introduced himself to Americans, detailed his time as governor in Minnesota, highlighting his work in transgender rights, gun safety laws, and abortion rights. It sure was an eventful night, and now we want to dig more into this. Here are Lincoln and Mary.
Yeah, Ron, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Matthew Brogdon from Utah Valley University. He serves as the Senior Director of UVU's Center for Constitutional Studies at the Gary R. Herbert Institute. Thanks for coming in this morning to talk about this. We want to talk about all conventions in politics.
Yeah.
We're not picking any sides.
We have a lot to talk about
Yes.
here. Where does the race go from here now that these conventions are over?
Well, I think we move on to a contest that wasn't so much foreseen a few months ago when Republicans held their convention. Joe Biden was still the candidate, the incumbent. So this could be a very different race. And I think we have some real uncertainty about just what effect the convention will have and what effect Harris's candidacy will have. She's really still in a honeymoon period.
It's considered that. What about the convention bump? Will she get a bump from this week? And did Trump have a bump?
Convention bumps are real. With Trump's, it's a little hard to disentangle because you had the assassination attempt, which came with its own bump. But bumps tend to be, ephemeral. They don't last very long. So I think we're yet to see. Normally, we don't have a candidate who's so new to the candidacy and going through the convention at the same time. So really a quite unique scenario in terms of our nominating contests.
What are the differences that you noticed between the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention? I mean, they were weeks apart. So what are some of the differences you noticed?
Yeah. So I think it's rooted, Nikki Haley said before she left the race back in the spring that the first party to dump its 80-year-old candidate was going to win the election. I think in some ways the mood of the two conventions is a little bit reflective of that. The Republican convention would have been a much different thing with a younger, newer candidate, and I think we saw that with the Democratic National Convention. Imagine if Joe Biden was the candidate. The DNC would be a much more somber affair. So I think there's been a lot of talk of joy and exuberance and this sort of excitement. Some of that comes with the change that's happening in terms of Biden stepping out at the last minute. Some of it also is just the excitement of moving on to someone new in presidential politics.
Well, and the changes in these conventions, I mean, I grew up watching them, with family, getting into politics. Yeah. They're a lot different now than they used to be. It used to be an actual competition.
It was. Until 1972, conventions decided the nominee. So from the 1830s, from Andrew Jackson's nomination in 1831 for the Democratic ticket all the way up until 1972, we had conventions where delegates chose the nominee. Sometimes that was more contentious than others. Now, that confuses people because they think we've been voting in primaries for 100 years, right? And that is true. The progressives instituted primaries to try to have a public selection, what we would call a plebiscitary selection of candidates. But those were not binding, and they were fairly rare. I think throughout the 1950s and 60s, there were maybe 15, 16 primaries a year. And those were just beauty contests. They didn't bind delegates. I'm a little bit in the camp of, let's make conventions great again. It might be worth thinking about shortening our primary season, the electoral contest, and having delegates to conventions actually have a debate about who ought to be the party's candidate.
Well, and it seemed more like a pep rally, didn't it?
Yes, it
Both
definitely
of them.
did.
Much
Both
so.
of them.
Yeah, with Coach leading it.
Yes.
Yeah,
We were
absolutely.
talking, obviously, about the Democratic National Convention because it just concluded. But at the Republican National Convention, former President Trump spoke about his assassination attempt. Take a listen.
I said to myself, wow, what was that? It can only be a bullet. And moved my right hand to my ear, brought it down. My hand was covered with blood. The discord and division in our society must be healed. We must heal it quickly.
Okay, now you mentioned that he did get a little bit of a bump from the assassination attempt, and then a bump on top of that with the convention. Do you think that'll help him? Will that one continue?
Well,
or do you think that's pretty temporary too?
I think Trump was getting a lot of help from the fact that he was running against Joe Biden and was doing extraordinarily well. I mean, it's worth noting that while Harris has enjoyed a bump, it's really just closed the race into a much tighter one. Trump was pulling away from Biden in a big way before he stepped out of the race, one of the things that generated him stepping out of the race. So I would expect to see the race tighten up, to be frank. I think we're going to have a very, very uncertain electoral outcome going into the fall.
Do you feel like
season.
the Trump campaign was prepared for the idea of Kamala Harris, or I guess somebody else coming up to the top of the ticket?
I don't think so. As much as it should have been foreseeable, or at least the possibility should have seemed like a real possibility, I think the rapidity with which it happened was a little surprising.
A big speed bump.
And there's got to be more than one Republican thinking, I wonder if this wouldn't be such a bad idea. But of course, they're past their convention.
Right.
So, Democrats lucked out in a way. Having the debate before their convention gave them this opportunity to deal with this in a fairly neat, clean fashion. If this was happening to Republicans right now past the convention, I think it'd be in pretty uncharted territories. What in the world to do if you lost a candidate or had a withdrawal or wanted to dump somebody from the ticket this late in the game? Right. So Democrats are really benefiting from what is a quite serendipitous timeline.
Big bump. Oh, at the DNC this week, there were a lot of celebrities who gave speeches. Oprah Winfrey, comedian Kenan Thompson, Stevie Wonder, John Legend. Why do you think the Democrats had so many celebrities? Republicans had celebrities too.
Well, I mean, Democrats have sort of done better in pop culture on the whole. There's just always been, or I shouldn't say always, at least since the 70s, there's been a much tighter fit between the Democratic Party and popular culture in the United States, especially whenever it comes to music, art, film. And I think they get a bit of help from that. They certainly are the beneficiaries of it, and that was very much on display. It's not that celebrities are foreign to the Republican Party, but that's not really its claim to fame.
Right. Ronald Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Donald Trump.
Right, that's right. Not quite as thrilling as Little John and Oprah Winfrey, but it's good.
One of the things we did notice with the world of entertainment, music choices. I believe it was the RNC. At the RNC, Trump walked out to James Brown's "It's a Man's World." Kamala Harris walked out to "Freedom" by Beyonce. Does music have its own little part of this, or does that just fit into the entertainment aspect of this?
Well, I mean, in some ways, politics is downstream from culture. Our politics does influence our culture, but much more so, people get their assumptions about the world from a much richer set of interactions: art, music, literature. their experience of religious life, their family experiences and communities. So politics is kind of the recipient of all those things, even though there's a bit of a feedback and they can influence it. And so I think, you know, Democrats are really benefiting from the fact that at least in the current moment, you know, pop culture seems to be running their direction.
It might be like they're maybe getting people from the opposing party to watch for the entertainment value.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I'm sure they're very happy about that.
Yeah.
I'll say, too, this is also part of the divide between, you know, Republicans have this claim to representing sort of middle America, your average American, your blue-collar person, which is a bit of a role reversal from 100 years ago. And the pop culture piece sort of puts that in place. There is still a tension, actually, between pop culture, Hollywood, and pop culture hits, and sort of, I guess, middle-class values. Democrats are trying to do both, right? We're the party of the popular culture, we're the party of the middle class. We'll see if they can hold that together.
Yep, we will see.
Dr. Brogdon, thanks so much for joining us from UVU. We appreciate it. Well, I'm sure we'll talk to you more throughout this election season.
Thank